Okay, welcome to episode 15 of New York City Bike Culture. I'm very excited to sit here with Julius Quito. I hope that's how you pronounce it. You can tell me later, more later. Julius is a bike rider, racer in New York City right now. He was born in the Philippines, in Manila. And you currently live in Queens, or do you remember correctly that you moved recently?
I recently moved. Yes.
And you can tell us more about where to. But to finish kind of the introduction on my end, and you can tell us more. Um, Julius is part of the Dave Jordan racing team that is part of part of CRCA. You were also for 2 years the vice president of racing at CRCA, I think 2017-18. And then you're still riding, you're still racing as time allows. You have one son at home, so that's keeping you. He's keeping you busy, I'm sure. And you're also, I don't know, I think I haven't said that yet, the director of IT at the Museum of the City of New York, and I'm excited that we see the special exhibit that you guys had last year in 2019 on cycling in the city as your background, and we'll talk about that. No worries. I thought that was a great project. I wish there would obviously be a permanent museum, but hey, their space is limited in New York City, and it's a good museum. It's a great museum to go to anyway, and it's manageable, and it's, I think, a little lower on your budget too to go to compared to some of the other museums that New York City has to offer. Julius, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Like you said, I am from Manila, Philippines. I emigrated from Manila to New York in 1994 when I was 11 years old and been a New Yorker ever since. I was a VP of racing for the CRCA for 2 years. And I worked my other job as IT director for the Museum of the City of New York.
Yeah. Wait. So you have this is a separate job.
Well, the VP of CRCA was a whole new job, a whole different job.
We'll talk about the demands of that some other time. Yeah, yeah. Your actual job is the director of IT at the Museum of the City of New York. Um, so, would you describe yourself as a New Yorker now,
Oh yeah, that's tough.
or do you feel more like you're from the Philippines? What do you tell people?
Right. Being born and raised in the Philippines, but till I was 11, basically 2/3 of my life it has been in New York. So maybe I would say my skin is New Yorker, but my bones and heart is, Filipino. I would
Hmm.
say maybe that. I definitely grew up in New York, but always at heart.
You go back a lot, or is there, like, I don't know? The New York City is not. Maybe I'm wrong. Not known so much for its vibrant Filipino community, although I'm sure there is a sizable community here. Or, are you connected, or do you go back a lot?
Yes, we do go back. You know, when budget allows. I do have a big family in the Philippines, and I do sometimes want to have teach my son. Not sometimes, but I do want to teach my son. The his culture. The other half of his culture. Um,
Yeah.
there is a big. You'll be surprised. A Filipino community in Queens.
Hmm.
But of course, as any other nationality in New York, mainly spread out. But there is a big community of Filipinos in Queens.
Yeah. Um, so growing up, then, did you learn? I'm assuming you learned how to ride a bicycle in Manila, and that was a means of transportation, or was that more of a how was your relationship with cycling that early?
It was more of a getting around the village kind of thing. You know, it wasn't a very Philippines was not very like a rich country. It was a third world country, but we are not that poor. So I my family could afford a bike for me, which unfortunately got stolen. That was pretty. I do remember that. That was my first bike that my dad gave me, and yep, that was taken away. But you know,
Was it more that so that was like the typical kid story, and I think for a lot of people, having at least one bike stolen is kind of part of that story too, unfortunately. The I mean that was definitely in my past as well, and then that was Germany, and I just talked to John Tomlinson, and yet that happened in Prospect Park, so I feel like that's a common denominator too. So you came over here, which I'm sure was a crazy experience in many ways, and a challenging experience. And I'm assuming that you grew up with another language too, or I'm not sure if you grew up speaking English only at home, but there's a lot of changes that came with that. Now it's a few years later. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, and tell us a little bit more about how you eventually ended up riding bikes as a sport, as a hobby.
uh, well, about the language, luckily, Filipinos were very fluent already with English. We do mix English with our native language, and even if you kind of dive deep into Philippine culture as well, or Philippine history, it has a lot of Spanish words in it. Just like you can tell with my last name is a very Spanish name. Um, but so coming to America at a young age, yes, it was a big culture shock, but I was able to blend in pretty quickly because the English language was taught in school and also it was everywhere. It was on TV shows in the Philippines and in movies, so it was very easy to just kind of translate that. Uh, Getting into bikes in New York was a different story. Growing up in growing up in Brooklyn, Canarsie, in my teens, you know, just to visit your friend from Avenue L to Avenue M or in Flatlands, um, you had to take a bus or drive. I didn't have any money to do that, and you know, so it was just by chance that I found this beat up BMX that somebody was throwing out, and decided to take it and sort of repair it, like just to get it up and running, so I could just use it from traveling from point A to point B, and in a way, that kind of taught me how to sort of repair bikes and also um, what kind of bikes there are. It was an old BMX bike, but technically I was getting parts from the street, and then just putting onto my bike. So my friends actually called it like the Frankenstein bike. So it had like a BMX with like a hybrid handlebar. So yeah, that's sort of how I got. That's sort of my first New York memory of biking in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a pretty typical experience. Maybe not for everybody, but I think a lot of people can identify with that. Of yeah, scrambling to find a bike and using a bike for transportation primarily when they're that age. And well, I think you went a little further. You became a bike mechanic or taught yourself some basic skills. I think that's that not the easiest thing. I mean, you did it because you had a need for it, right? And you were describing. I'm a little familiar. I ride, living in southern Brooklyn. I've ridden out to Canarsie and kind of ridden through like Flatlands and all that. And it's not a particularly bike friendly environment. I imagine back then there were probably no bike lanes to speak of. Now they've put in a few where you're like, okay, I mean, are they respected is another question, but even there, they're pretty sparse, right? This is not the area of Brooklyn or New York City that gets a lot of attention, kind of bike infrastructure wise.
And this was in the '90s, yes. But thankfully, I didn't get into any accidents during that time. So pretty happy with that.
Yeah. Was it a lot of riding through parks and sidewalks and kind of knowing which streets to take that were less busy, or
Yes, riding in the sidewalk, and yeah, trying to avoid the Belt Parkway as much as possible, and the busy streets in Flatbush. I forgot that street name, but that's pretty crazy street. So trying to avoid those and taking the local streets.
was that what a lot of kids were doing then? You were describing a friend there, or were you kind of more the odd one out in terms of riding the bike to places?
Believe it or not, I was the odd one. I remember my friend's parents were surprised that usually it's their parents are dropping the kids to home, drop by car, making sure that they're there. And then when I told them that I got there by bike, and they were surprised, and it's like, why are you biking in Brooklyn by yourself? You're still so young. Like I didn't really see much of a big deal. It wasn't, you know, if it was in danger, I would just bike away really fast. So maybe that's why I got into racing. Just
You so there were some situations where you had to put on a little sprint. Yeah, I remember. I mean, this is probably a very different experience, but when I was kind of first road bike racing and all that in Arizona when I was a PhD student, there was a few places where the dogs weren't really on leash and they were starting to chase the bikes, and you would have to put on a little sprint or yell at the dogs and try to get them to not run into your bike. That's probably not why you had to sprint occasionally, but I very different experience, but yeah, somewhat similar probably. Yeah, somewhat similar. Yeah. So um, growing up then in Canarsie, Brooklyn, and kind of yeah, using it transportation. Did you ride to school too, or
no. That one was a little bit more difficult. My high school was in downtown Brooklyn.
okay?
So yeah, like bike lanes in the 90s, I don't think the word existed yet. I think it only existed in like the Netherlands or something.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's growing up in Germany. I think the roads were safe enough where I grew up, but yeah, there weren't too many dedicated bike lanes necessarily either, although quite a few. So you kind of use it as a means of transportation, not really as a sporting device. I'm assuming you mentioned kind of BMX connection there, but not. It wasn't like you had people there that you were like, oh yeah, I'm going to be like this guy, or I like BMX, or I'm into this as a sport. This was just a means of transportation, a means of getting around.
Yes, yes, it was just a means of transportation, but I always did dream of owning a road bike. Um, I remember seeing the first road bike. I was, I believe, 8 years old in the Philippines. It was a down tube shifter, and I thought it was like the most mechanically, what is the word I'm looking for? Like marvel. Like it was like, wait, you can change gears on a bicycle and you do it through these levers. I was 8 years old in the 80s during that time, and I remember that. And yeah, I've always, when I came to New York, I always wanted one, but I just didn't have the money. But I did see other riders. There were cyclists in New York during that time. I have seen them. It's just I never had the budget for.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this. It's obviously an expensive sport, especially when you're a kid. I mean, that's a big expense. So maybe let's fast forward. I think it's interesting anyway, though, that you had growing up in Canarsie, you had maybe it was more from the mechanics perspective, some fascination with road bikes, or because not everybody even notices that there are different types of bikes, really, right? It's just a bike, it's fine.
Most people, yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
So how did it develop from there? I mean, I'm assuming you went. I don't know. Do you go to college and you suddenly years later are now in the position you're in? What happened in between, and what was the rest of that journey?
It would be a dark ages of bicycles for me in the college time because yes, I got my driver's license. Uh, my mom bought her own car and gave me her 1994 Toyota Corolla, which was a stick shift.
Oh
So
yeah.
I was all about the, in the late 90s, an Asian kid with a Toyota Corolla, make it look like it's drifting or that kind of thing. So I migrated to, I would say, some people would say I upgraded to a car, a big boy vehicle or something like that. So yeah, didn't really had any interest in bikes during college, which I kind of now regret because I kind of missed that Frankenstein bike. I don't know what happened to that one. Probably, probably in some junkyard now, where being recycled or something.
Yeah, but I think that's a pretty typical experience, right? When once you can get in your hands and you have a car, I think you're fascinated with that. It is a big toy. It is really convenient. I think you're right that society teaches us that that's kind of the next step to adulthood, kind of, right? And obviously there's a lot of car subcultures too, like there are cycling subcultures, right? You mentioned drifting and that car culture there. I think it's not the it's I don't know, from what I understand, I didn't grow up in New York City, but it's not necessarily the typical New York City experience either, that you get a car when you're 18 or 16, like in many other parts of the country, right? So I'm sure that felt good, felt special, and that I can totally see the fascination there. So that was college, to the dark ages. So what when did the dark ages end?
Well, I
Or
should
what got you out of the dark ages?
about where I went to college that required a car. So I ended up in Farmingdale University, which is in Long Island.
Mm.
Um, so it's about, I believe, 20 miles from the city. And the only way to get there is through train, the LIR, or right, a vehicle. Um, and then from there, I moved back to the city to start finding a job. You know, the gas starting to become very expensive. I found that, and then yes, I started working in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Academy of Music. I started working in Long Island City. It became apparent that it's having a car is not very efficient, budget friendly to just drive in the same borough just to go to work. Um, so I switched to subway, as many other um, New Yorkers during that time. And then I noticed that I've seen a lot of people starting to commute by bike. And I guess that was the sort of the rise of cycling in New York City. So I decided I should join this. I should jump into this bandwagon because this could save me some Metro card costs. And also I could be, fit. I was starting, I think, hitting my late 20s, becoming 30, starting to become middle aged with your body's starting to change. So I needed some exercise, and I've always liked biking since right when I was in high school. Um, Give it a try, and then I think at one point didn't know anything about the CRCA. I just happened to just like pass by with my bike, and then there was a marshal stopped me. There was a group coming, and then from there, when this huge peloton just passed by, I guess I now know what that word is. I guess I just called it a bunch of cyclists passing through. I just was like, oh my god, I have to do this. I have to join that, and I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, so this was in Central Park then.
Oh, sorry. Yes, this was in Central Park. Yes.
Yeah. And you were out early in the morning, or because Central Park races are usually pretty early. I mean, I'm assuming they were early back then too.
I just happened to. I believe I was going to do. I was just riding out. I wasn't working in museum yet. I just happened to just ride this new road bike that I bought just for fun in the morning on a weekend, And then yes, I just saw, oh, Central Park is closed because this person is telling me not to go through. No, he's just telling me there's a big group coming in, and then I saw that, and I was like, oh my god, I have to join this. Next thing you know, yep, I'm now racing.
Yeah, yeah, and you have been for a few years, right?
Yes, I think I started 2013.
Yeah,
It's been a
yeah. I think that's when I started. Yeah, 2013 actually. That's when I started bike racing. Really, yeah, back in Arizona. But yeah, so it's been a while. Yeah. What was the fascination? Because a lot of other people could be like, I get a lot of stories of the road cyclists not giving up the friendly vibe. Is there some kind of athletic kind of pursuit there, or was it the bike fascination, or what attracted you to it?
I think with a combination of the hardware, I've always admired the road bike, like just how cool it is. Some people see a Porsche, they are just like in love with it. And for me, it was just like the look of the road bike. I just loved it. So, and then I found out that, oh my god, people actually race with this kind of bike. I know I've seen it in TV with Tour de France and other races. I have never known that it actually happens in New York. Like, oh, this is actually happening in New York. It's like I thought people just like walk or run in New York. It's like there's an actual racing. Um, I guess I've been so cooped up in Brooklyn, Canarsie that I don't know what else is happening, even in Prospect Park. I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's a big city, right? And if you don't know, and if you're not in one of the parks at 6, 7, 8 in the morning,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know. I think it would be really easy to miss. I mean, it's not like anybody's going to be going out to Floyd Bennett Field on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. unless they're drifting cars, probably. Or they're learning how to drive a sweeper for like the street cleaning machine for the Department of sanitation. I mean, there's not many reasons to go out all the way to Floyd Bennett either. So I think it's really, while we always talk about how many races we have, it's really easy to miss them in a city where there's so much going on. It's so big and there's so many people, right? Yeah, I think that's understandable that you missed out, didn't see that. So you got into it, and yeah, started racing 2013. We're going to talk about kind of your involvement more later. But one of the things that struck me and that I wanted to bring up is I think one of the reasons I probably know you is because you were the vice president of racing, and you did organize the club racing. But I feel like one of the things that stands out about you too is, and you coming across as a very kind of calm, thoughtful guy right now. I was going to say too that the fascination with the gear is a very common one, which for a guy who was into IT is probably not that surprising. We used to joke when I was in the collegiate cycling team at Arizona State that half the club was engineers, because the engineers just love the gear part, like talking and looking about the gear and how it's built. And that was never my thing, but I understand that attraction. But back to you're coming across as a kind of calm guy here, but I feel like every time I see you out, you were somebody who had a smile on his face, and it was really easy to talk to and approachable. And I think that in many ways that probably was good too. I would hope that it helped you in that position of vice president of racing and in a lot of the tasks that you had there. Do you feel that way about yourself, that you were approachable and were easygoing and just kind of a guy with a smile on your face, with a smile on the face all the time, spreading positive vibes, or is that not necessarily who you are?
Well, there might be some CRCA members that probably don't remember me as that.
Well, that's the nature of the position. Yeah, that's the nature of the position of VP of racing, that you have to yell at people sometimes, probably.
Well, it was all out of love, right? um, well, I mean, I like I said, like when I saw that first group, it might have been the A group. I couldn't tell at that time. I just fell in love with racing. I There was just that real feeling of not, I wouldn't say competitive, but more like, oh my God, this is actually happening on a local scale. Um, and once I started joining, once I joined CRCA, and then I start racing all the other local races, like what you said, Prospect Park, Floyd Bennett Field, and then some of the more high profile one like White Plains, Crit. And then, once you start joining that, you start to see the same people that joins those races, and it feels like they become like your neighbors, right? Like, because like, oh my God, like, we all live in New York and we're all racing this race together, and it feels like a community event rather than a competitive event for me. So with that kind of mindset, I don't see it as such a competition, but it's a party. And that's why I've met a lot of friends actually through races. Like Etsu himself, you, I just to name a few. So I feel like every time we have a race, it feels like a block party. It doesn't feel like an actual, like competitive sport, but more of a party. So that's why I kind of like that vibe, and maybe that's why it sort of shows in my face that I'm enjoying that. I have a teammate commented to me a while ago that I race to train, not the other way around. Like, I don't necessarily don't tell my coach that I don't like to really train, but I love racing. And the thing is, when I race a lot, that's when I get fit. And I don't see it as this, exercise. It's a fun party to go to. And I guess that's what it sort of shows in my face when you see me in these races. I could be last place, I could be, DNF, did not finish. I don't care. I went to Floyd Bennett Field on a Tuesday. I did 5 laps out of 13 on the A field. I don't care. I'm going, and then after that we do the Flatbush group ride, and I that's so memorable to me that we take over Flatbush, and then go home through there, and that's what I love about the New York City and the cycling local community kind of events.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. I think obviously not everybody has that approach, but I think it shows like the way. Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably what I see in your face. That's probably what I see in the way you act and talk to people. That there's an enjoyment and a relaxed attitude too. And yeah, that ride you described. That I live in Southern Brooklyn, so I can avoid doing it. But we often meet at Veselka after the race, and then I do that too with teammates. But Flatbush is this kind of artery or vein that goes kind of across Brooklyn off the grid, right? It really is that pulsating thing that you ride all the way from in what feels like, yeah, you're in a different planet, on a different planet, on this old airport, and then you ride through and you see the neighborhoods changing and traffic increasing or decreasing, and you go by the park and you go over the bridge into Manhattan if you want to, or people peel off into different parts of Brooklyn or Queens. And yeah, it's that journey I think you're describing, especially after the race, is a crazy one, and it's a fun one at the same time, and you really feel alive. Yeah.
Yeah, you might be bumping elbows during that race, but in Flatbush coming home from that race, you're protecting each other from, vans or sudden doors opening, or, that kind of stuff. So, and that's sort of that feeling that I really loved about that. Like, yeah, you could be enemies on the race, but after that, we're all neighbors. We're gonna see each other next Thursday or Saturday or Sunday for this other race. So, it's that feeling, that vibe.
Totally, and I think you're right. I think on that ride particularly, the groups often mix a little bit more than other times, and you kind of end up talking to someone you don't usually talk to, or you ride next to someone you don't usually ride next to, and I think that's a great part of that appeal too. And no, there's no bike lane on Flatbush, really, most parts, but we make it work. This is southern, this is pretty close to Canarsie after all, so yeah. Um, Awesome. I think that was already great. In terms of just about yourself. I do want to move on a little bit, but I think you've already outlined this a little bit. So before we get into what you've worked on with CRCA and other parts of your life, how do you see then your position kind of in? I think, did you move to New Jersey? Is that right?
I did.
Yeah. So how do you see then now your role in the New York City cycling community? And again, I think that the New York City cycling community really goes way beyond the city limits. I think there's the metro area that we're really talking about here. That's all part of that community. And a lot of people who are part of the community live on the New Jersey side of things, right? So how do you feel now? How are you connected with it? How do you feel like, what's your role? Are you just kind of an observer, an occasional racer? What do you do?
I think it might be too early for me to say that it has changed, but I do feel, or I still want to go to, even though I live in New Jersey now, I still want to go to Floyd Bennett on a Tuesday night. That might be a little more farther than Queens, uh, but I still want to. Maybe that could change over time. It might be too early for me to say. I have been living only in New Jersey for about less than a month, so. But I don't. I know the first races, right, in the morning, in the early of the year is usually Branch Brook, New Jersey. Um, so that's much closer to me now. It's everybody that I see often that's gonna race like what the next day in Central Park for the club races. So I feel not so segmented or so far away from the community that I need to have a new perspective in cycling. Of course, I could be, just saying that now because, right, I'm still very New Jerseyer. Well, I guess that's the word. But I, I think at heart, I'm still a New Yorker still.
Yeah, I think having grown up in the city, yeah. um, and I think you're right. The Branchbrook race, right? I don't know where exactly in New Jersey you are, but that's obviously closer. That's out there in what is it technically? I don't even know.
Newark?
It's Newark. Yeah. It's and I think that the people who go there are about 50-50 people who live in New Jersey and people who live in the city. I might be wrong, but it feels like a good mix of racers. And there's the Rockley Crit, which is kind of the New Jersey side equivalent of Floyd Bennett Field, but on a Thursday night. Kind of a similar vibe in that it's small on the weekday night, smaller, and then the big weekend races, it's still big, but smaller. So you got options there too, obviously. Which is great, right? And you obviously have access to the more coveted kind of out of the city riding that a lot of people want or go to when they're in the city. That they're always like, oh, we go out 9W, and I don't know how far away from 9W you are, but there's other probably better or more open cycling roads probably around where you are. You just probably have to explore them still.
Just have to explore more. Yep.
And it is winter right now, so a little harder to do that.
Hopefully. I mean, I'm excited.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. It sounds like you're moving on up in the world. Having moved to New Jersey, I know, if I remember correctly, your son, you I don't know if that was still a recent thing, but how old is your son? 11. So I think he was part of the Star Trek Youth Development Program at some point at least, and I think I've seen him on a bike a few times. Is that going to change now that you're in New Jersey? Star Treks are pretty far away from New Jersey, being out in Casino mostly.
I don't think so. I think we're gonna keep going with it. I mean, if I were to be honest, there would be only two options for a youth cycling track program. One is, I believe, in Pennsylvania, and one in Queens. I think I'm still closer to the one in Queens. Um, and I definitely know Queens more like the back of my hand. So driving there on a Saturday morning is not that bad. Yeah, and it's something that I do still want him to experience. I honestly think it's a really great program that really disciplines kids who doesn't really know anything about cycling and the how to control themselves on a track bike and a on a track. Um, I'm just really impressed about how well that program is and how it could transform a child from not knowing anything about bicycles to a track rider.
Yeah, and I think you're probably right. At the one, I don't know what the program is called there, but you're talking about what's called, I think that the track riders called T Town, Trexler Town, right, in Pennsylvania. Um, and yeah, you're much closer to it now, but you're still a good drive away from it. Yeah. And you, since he's already familiar with the Star Trek program, like you said, it's not too bad. And if you only go there on a Saturday morning, I don't know how often the program, how often there even would be opportunities to meet. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, are you living vicariously a little bit there? Are you living through your son, kind of doing is he doing the things that you missed out on, or how did you get him into that? And does he enjoy it still, or has he been, was he skeptical in the beginning?
He acts like he doesn't enjoy it. You know, he's at that age where he prefers to just stay at home and play video games. I think I was like the same way when I was 11. So, being mad about that is just being, hypocritical. Um, but honestly, I could see him after the training or after the session. He enjoys it because it's the same thing I feel. His friends are there, um, and he meets other kids as well. So it's like it's like a going to the playground, except it's just with teachers. So and it's I kind of see it the same way, local community kind of activity.
And are you doing the dad thing then? You bring like a lawn chair, a folding chair, and you sit by the track or on the bleachers, or what do you do?
Put 1,000 and 12,000 watts now, kind of spray. No, no.
Have an argument with the coach. Yeah.
You definitely beat that kid, to the line. No, a lot of the parents are, you know, they- I guess it's like comparing it to like soccer dads and soccer moms. It's kind of like that. You know, you do get teary up when, there you can see your son or, daughter, sweating it out and just like pouring their heart out and trying their best to beat the other person or just trying to beat that time. You do get teary eye seeing your child do that kind of stuff, and I do feel proud.
Yeah, as well you should, I think. And I mean, you're doing a lot of the work there too, driving out and being there. I've seen pictures of them like in the winter training in like a container, like a shipping container, and all that. Is that still a thing, or?
That's how the CRCA uses a trailer for their storage for their equipment. Star Trek have yeah, containers, shipping containers. Uh, Whatever, that's typical New Yorker. Whatever they can use, they use.
Yeah, whatever's safe, and yeah, in the winter you don't have many options. And I think the picture was like 12 kids cramped into the container and generating enough heat that it wasn't so cold in the container anymore. So that was great. I think it's quite the picture. Let's talk. Um, so yay, Star Trek. I think everybody on the show has said that so far. We're familiar with the program. I can't vouch for it personally, but by all the evidence says yay. Let's talk about the background, your green screen there, the Museum of the City of New York, the work that you do, and obviously you're the director of IT. So I imagine that you're more indirectly in terms of the logistics and infrastructure, maybe connected to host those exhibits and all that. You're not maybe leading that necessarily, but that was an exhibit that was a temporary one for like 6 or 9 months or something like that, right? And well, I don't know how successful it was in terms of attracting people, but I think it really had a lot of great features, from a lot of history to kind of a lot of intersections with different issues, to like city bikes set up there so that everybody could jump on there and see how many watts they're doing on Zwift. And there were a lot of great pictures from the past, and different, we've seen your picture, different models of bikes and all kinds of stuff, all focused on New York City, of course. And I think there's a book that's available that's like 200 years of cycling in the city or something like that. It's connected to it as well. The name of the author, I think, is a professor somewhere in the DC area. It escapes me, but I'll put in the show notes. So how did that come about? Were you connected with it much, or more so by being in the working for the museum, or and what was your impression of it? How did you enjoy it?
I absolutely enjoyed working, um, with the curators and the designers about this show. Um, the first time I heard about it is actually when I started working for the museum back in 2014. Actually, the museum has been trying to put a cycling show since, I believe, the late 2000s, but it wasn't, just for funding purposes or some, work stuff and money stuff. It just never really happened until, the big renaissance really of New York cycling, where bike lanes has now ranged from, I don't know the exact number now, like 300 or 400 miles now of bike lanes in New York City. All thanks to the Bloomberg administration under Sadiq Khan. Um, there was a huge uptick of cyclists in New York, which kind of sort of restarted the interest of this exhibition because of such of the popularity currently that's what's happening in New York City to do. Uh, and you know, as a museum, they really want to tell the history of it, but they were kind of lost on the current events of cycling. And I kind of heard about it and about this exhibit, and of course, I contacted our chief curator, and I said, I have some connections with some of the organizations that basically the show is asking for some loans. One of them would be the CRCA, and the other one would be the New York Cycling Club, which both I am a member of. Um, and at that point, I was giving contact information. I gave JT's information. JT was absolutely helpful on grabbing some of the CRCA artifacts that we had.
Yeah, so John Tomlinson, just for those who haven't paid attention to the previous episode, but yeah, JT, yeah, no, just to clarify, absolutely, yeah. I think it's obvious, but just in case.
And then, right, they asked me, like, okay, so this is about the past. What about like something of the now in the present? Um, and of course, with my IT background, I wanted to create some sort of like a digital interactive that visitors can interact. And how can you bike digitally inside a museum? It's not like you can just literally, have a bike and ride around it in a museum. And that's literally what I told them to do. Ride a bike in the museum.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah.
And I know, Charlie. I know Charlie worked for Swift.
Yeah, so this is Charlie Eisendorf, who has also been featured on the show already, the organizer of the Prospect Park races, and formerly Floyd Bennett, and a much accomplished rider racer in the New York City area, working for Zwift. Yeah.
Oh, I also learned that Eric Min, the CEO of Swift, was also a New York biker a while ago. So I contacted Charlie. Charlie connected me to some people for equipment procurement, because what I was envisioning was, okay, so how can we make our visitors experience New York City cycling, which is I, when I thought about it, it's like, oh my God, we're literally right in front of Central Park. There's a city bike station next to our building. They could literally just go outside, take a city bike, and go enjoy Central Park. Why would they come to the museum and ride on a virtual New York City on a city bike indoors? Um, that's all in retrospect now. But at first, I was really enthusiastic about this because I'm kind of bringing in all the contact information that I had, the resources that I bring into the table into this exhibit, to sort of kind of not really tell a story, but more of having a nice plus interactive for the yeah a nice thing for the visitors to experience. Maybe some of the visitors that came to New York during that time were, you know, they're afraid to bike in New York City. So that was sort of one of my arguments was, this is a way to do it. You bike inside a museum of New York City and then just say, it's a photo op. It's a so that's sort of what I pushed for on that end. And we've gotten really good feedback about it, which I'm actually happy about.
Yeah, I think that was my wife jumped on there. I jumped on there. Several other people jumped on there. I think in museums when you have something interactive that people can actually use and touch and do something with. I think that was super fun. That was a super fun element. And obviously I'm someone who really enjoys. My wife laughs about the like informational plaques and like reading stuff, but that's not everybody's thing. Like other people just like looking at the objects. After a while, you kind of get the information fatigue. That's for me at least in museum. Like you can only take in so much until you need to do something or you just can't handle anymore in terms of your brain. And then jumping on the bike was great. It was a nice way to kind of yeah. And I think a lot of people were taking selfies there and were taking a picture and posting probably. I don't know. You know more about that probably on social media maybe even about it. And yeah, I think it was really for me I always want to see more. So I was like, this exhibit could have been like another room or something like that for me. But I think it was a lot packed into was it half of a hall, like a floor in the museum or something like that? Yeah.
Um, yeah, feedback from the visitors have been really great about it. So I am very proud that I had an idea and I executed that idea for that. Uh, I think in both ends of the spectrum, like having a meeting, trying to implement this is like, are you seriously going? Like people were like, are you seriously gonna put a bicycle and people can ride the bicycle in the museum? And then of course logistics is just a nightmare. It's like, what if a toddler's finger get caught in the one of the spokes. Safety. Oh my God,
Yeah.
that was so many meetings. And then on the other side, when I was telling these stories to my friends and my bike friends and teammates, it's like, wait, how can you put a city bike on a Wahoo trainer? It's like, what? So it's like everybody's telling me like I'm crazy, but it happened. It happened.
It happened. I don't know how you did measure the power. I don't remember that setup anymore, but I want to say there was like some plexiglass around the wheel that was spinning still or something like that to like get the toddlers away from there, or I don't remember exactly.
Yes, it was the anti-toddler.
At the end of the toddler device, yeah, it was a little fence. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it actually happened. I was really surprised too that it happened.
what
Was it on a trainer? Was there an internal like in the hub power meter? How did you measure how did you connect it to Zwift?
the power
It
output?
was. Thank you if somebody from Wahoo and Swift is watching this. It was somebody. It was a Wahoo trainer. It was I guess the snap kicker one.
The one that is the where the wheel stays on and then yeah.
I don't even know how to begin, where to begin if I had to remove the city bike wheel and then putting that on a the direct attach trainer.
Yeah. Yeah, those devices were not built with each other in mind, kind of. Yeah. So, no, they're very opposite end of the cycling kind of spectrum, which is good. But yeah, you guys made it happen. I thought it was pretty cool to see. Yeah. Probably very unique setup. Yeah.
I think somebody was actually commenting. It was like, wait, how much did you pay City Bike to rent this for 8 months? The bill must have been astronomical. It's like, no, we actually contacted City Bike. They were actually really surprised too, and then they copied my idea, and then they did it for city streets.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know how far they got back in 2019 with,
Mm.
but they started doing that as well with the summer streets. I forgot it's somewhere in like Soho. That
Yeah. So it's like they close the streets off, right?
Yeah,
And they had like a mobile kind of also like a stationary bike kind of setup then, or
stationary bike, and then you ride it digitally, which is
wow.
also, when you think about it, there's people riding city bikes in the thing. Just go there. Why do you need to?
Yeah, it's very surreal. Yeah, it's very meta somehow. Yeah. When you're like, as you're like in the streets of New York, riding the streets of New York virtually.
Stationary.
Yeah.
You're literally right next to the path of the bikes.
Yeah, I guess you don't have to worry about safety and watching out for traffic and all that. But yeah, that is a very unique setup. Yeah, I'd be curious to see that in outside too. Yeah, but that's great. That's a great. I hope to see that. I think it's a cool idea. Yeah. So, um, that kind of creativity, were you able to, or were you pretty limited with bringing that into kind of a hard curve to back to CRCA?